Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is John Worthland. He's the industry principal for manufacturing, transportation, and logistics at Zebra Technologies. John, good to have you with us this morning.
Thanks for having me today, Tom. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
And you're deeply involved in data standardization. And tell us what that means in this context of modernization and in keeping track of what's where for federal agencies.
Yeah, so data standardization is very important. It's really the universal language that trading partners use to describe not only what the assets are that they're trading, but also the different activities that go along throughout the supply chain, like shipping, receiving, pulling of, picking items. It's all about how do we talk a common language. And today I'm excited to talk about especially the GS1 standards, global standards that have been set aside since for the last 40 years when, kind of the barcode got established. And it just really has grown from there internationally.
Yeah, let's go into that a little bit about what GS1 is. It's so foundational and so taken for granted. People may have forgotten what it is in the first place.
Right. So GS1 is a non-for-profit organization. It's a global organization that sets standards for the data in the barcodes that you see, not only on the products that you purchase and trade, but also the data formats of exchanging information. So if you've heard of EDI before, electronic data interchange, you might, order something and you get a purchase order, right? From a buyer to a seller. Well, that information is put into a certain format so that, those two systems can talk to each other. GS1 standards set those formats so that when you scan a barcode, it can basically translate those ones and zeros to, oh, this is the product number, this is the manufacturer it came from, and so forth. And there's lots of different ways that we do that with activities throughout the whole supply chain. And especially when we think about the federal government's not only doing business, point to point amongst themselves. You think about my background, I came from medical logistics in the Air Force way back, right? We did a lot of trading between installations, but obviously we did a lot of trading with local purchase providers, commercially. So, we had to have different standards. And, I kind of equate it to the old conversation. I get home from work and my wife's like, well, what do you want for dinner? No, I don't know. What do you want for dinner? Right. It's, we're never getting on that same page, and we finally figure that out. And that's kind of what we're trying to do here, right? Is, the GS1 standards are put out. United States is the biggest supplier, if you will, or proponent of GS1, but it's a global organization. But not everybody uses GS1 standards, and that's really where sometimes we get a breakdown of communications, and it makes it difficult.
Yes, and I guess it may be obvious, but it's probably worth stating that when you do put a barcode on a thing, an aircraft connector or whatever it might be, a commodity exchanged across a supply chain in the federal government, it lifts that thing out of the proprietary nature that it has from the manufacturer it had. Because exactly. I can remember many, many years ago, like distributors would have to try to harmonize their data systems so that part A was also part A in the next handoff. And now we don't have that issue anymore.
Right. And I'll expand on that. That's a really good example, Tom, because you may work with supplier one and they may call that number a part number, right? And supplier two may call that same number a catalog number, and so forth and so on. So what GS1 does is they normalize that information. So I'll see if you can see it, but if you think about a bottle of water, there's a barcode on it. Well, that information has what we call a global trade identification number. And that is the number that is registered from that manufacturer with GS1 that describes that product. And you think about the shirt that I'm wearing, the manufacturer would have different sizes, different colors. Each one of those variations has a different number that company has registered. So in that database, when I go to scan that item, at a register, or if I go to order that, it normalizes it and everybody knows what they're talking about. So that G10 is in your supplier's database as well as in your buyer's database.
And a couple of questions. One, how does it work in terms of getting a number? Suppose I have a product line of 50,000 items. Do I reserve barcode numbers, GS1 compliant numbers, like I would reserve a block of IP addresses?
That's exactly what you do. GS1 is that centralized management. So what happens is the first thing that an organization would do is they would identify a number that describes that organization, right? And then they would provide a list of their catalog items with the different variations, and that they would get a global trade identification number, or a GTIN, assigned to each one of those. And what happens is the manufacturer's number and that GTIN come together to form that, what you see at the bottom, those funny numbers at the bottom of your barcode. That's what that means. It's talking about who that is and what that item is. And you mentioned a really good point, Tom. Well, what if I run out of numbers? Well, what GS1 does is they may assign multiple numbers to a particular supplier. So, so the number doesn't get, your barcode's not, 50 or 100 characters long. It still stays in a standardized format because, computers like standards, right? We like to know that that number is going to be 10, 15 characters, no matter what it is. So GS1's that organization that assigns those, but they're also the ones that provide the education to these entities, as well as training.
And what's the mechanism by which all of the databases and all of the barcode readers in the world understand that particular number to be associated with that particular item?
Yeah, well, there's different ways. There's a lookup capability at GS1 that organizations can look up to help set up their numbers, but generally that GTIN and other various numbering systems are put into the various databases, right? So that they can talk to each other. The way that they talk to each other, it can be different ways. It could be an EDI transaction set, like we talked about earlier. It could be standards that may be set for GS1 in certain ways. There's an electronic product information code set. I think that's right. I'm going to probably butcher that, but EPCIS is a format that we're seeing the FDA has adopted for the Food Safety Maturity Act, which is a way to be able to trace food throughout the supply chain, as well as on the pharma side. The Drug Supply Chain Security Act is another way that we're tracking not only that's the bottle of water, but a serial number to attach that to know which bottle of water is going through the supply chain. So those two FDA initiatives are a really good idea of we're trying to do patient safety to track better, to make sure that if there is a problem, we can trace it back and provide safety to our families. But it also provides kind of forces the data standardization argument a little bit further, right?
And just a quick question, technically, if you assign a number to, say, the quart size bottle of XYZ brand water, that's one thing. If you have a different code for each and every instance of that bottle, suddenly you're multiplying it by millions and millions and millions. Can we run out of numbers?
Yeah, not necessarily, really, because the length of the manufacturer's number, the supplier's number, is variable. So they could be anywhere. I can't remember. I think it's 4 or 5 to I think it's 9. So those can vary. So there's a lot of numbering systems and inferences in there. So no, I don't see us running out of numbers anytime soon.
Earlier, you said that it's been widely adopted. Obviously, you can't go anywhere without seeing a barcode. I think people tattooing them on themselves even. But you said there's some areas where it's still greenfield for these GS1 coding type of standard system. What are some of those? And maybe talk about the federal government adoption of this.
I see a lot more of adoption and more of government entities, just because I think government entities align better with standards than commercial entities, right? They seem to, you can have a government entity like, let's say, the FDA, say we're going to use this or else, and the industry, populates that, right? That's a little bit different on the retail side, where you have a lot of players, anywhere from a mainstream supplier that you recognize, that's in your home, to maybe a value supplier that is producing 1,000 t-shirts for the World Series, right? They may not be that big on standards because it's a variable products that they have.
Right. So you can retire a line and maybe even recycle the numbers.
Right. Even if you see, you go into your store and you see your favorite barbecue sauce, and now it's packaged into, a couple of other flavors, that packaging gets its own GTIN as well. So there's a lot of different things that come into play with that standard.
So walk us through what's required if someone senses they have a use case for applying a standardized code to something or some things for a process purpose. How do you get started? What are some of the planning considerations? Tell us how you would begin here.
Well, at first, it's all about data, right? The real estate, industry has, their famous location, location, location. Well, if you want to be an effective trading partner in this e-commerce world, it's all about data, data, data. Well, GS1 allows multiple trading partners to provide that very, very specific, really the neurological network of trade, right? We have to be able to have the same amount of the same data in the receiving and shipping system in order to start that. And once you have that, Tom, then you can build on that. So we're seeing a lot of that in pharma right now, where they're being required by November of 2023 to not only ship product, but they have to ship the data along with that product that says which item is in which package is in what case, and they're using GS1 standards to do that. Well, one of the biggest problems is as they start trying to figure out and get that working right now, the source data needs to be cleaned up, and we're seeing a big adoption of the GS1 standards in order to make trading partners work. So it's not a light load, but if you would ask anybody, in this field, in this e-commerce world, it's something that's been a long time coming. So if you haven't already done it in your organization, you're probably wishing you had. And if you didn't, I'm sure that you have a team of data experts that have been added to address the issue.
And what are some of the safeguards built into the whole system such that people can't spoof a barcode or, send that scan to some other place, or especially in the cybersecurity context, because
Right.
it could be a way into a system, perhaps?
Yeah, there's lots of different things. A lot of times you can look at technology such as blockchain, right? Blockchain allows you to take a transaction and store different bits of that into different locations, and that way you have to have a key on each side in order to unlock those locations and put that those 10 characters back together. That's kind of what we're seeing on the forefront of technology right now. Simple user IDs, things like that are in place. That's fairly common. But there is a lot of counterfeiting that goes on. I mean, it's very easy to copy a barcode on a Gucci bag, let's just say, right? And stick that onto a counterfeit. And all of a sudden you're getting that, you're walking down New York City and you're getting a $30 Gucci bag and you're pretty happy about that, right? And that's really what we're seeing with these regulations. That's where that serial number comes in that's registered. If I can't trace that serialized item from manufacturer all the way through the supply chain, the ability for an end user to be able to go into a system and see that pedigree is intact, that gives that end user confidence that that product is legitimate. And you can imagine that certainly saves money in the Gucci bag scenario, but in the pharma and FDA scenario, that saves lives.
Sure, that's right. And what about the Defense Department? Are they a big proponent and user of this type of the system of the GS1 based tagging?
It varies, right? I came from the Air Force. I was in the Air Force in the early 90s, where barcoding was new, right? And I was fortunate enough to reconnect with a mentor of mine back in the 90s a couple of weeks ago, and I was at an Air Force base, and he took me on a tour of the logistics area. And I saw some adoption of standards, but I saw some of the standards that were 10, 15 years old. And it's interesting when myself as a consultant come into one of our customers, we're seeing a lot of that older standards. We're still seeing a lot of paper-based, some clipboards, a lot of spreadsheets. And obviously those spreadsheets aren't using GS1 standards, right? They're using whatever somebody came up with in a meeting. So, Tom, there's not a really good answer to your question, but it really varies. I think back to your, the counterfeiting, that I think the sensitivity of the data, that's where we're seeing a more aggressive adoption of standards and security technologies. So if you're moving, in a defense arena, and you're moving troops, or you're moving, some critical supplies, obviously you want that to be,
Sure.
Classified and secure. If I'm moving, t-shirts, I'm probably not as worried about that.
A couple of quick questions. The QR code, And the RFID code, are these also coming under the GS1 general umbrella?
Exactly. So GS1 also manages the standards of those. Going back to my examples and with the food and drug, um, the requirement in some of these regulations a couple of years ago in pharma was to encode the serial number, the G10, like we talked about, that global trade identification number, the lot number, and the expiration date were data elements that had to be added to the label and embedded into that 2D, or that what we call a QR code, onto the label, so that information could be extracted with a barcode reader that could read 2D barcodes, which most of them can if you've had them, in the last 5-6 years, right? But also we're seeing the adoption of RFID to have an inlay that's added to that existing label. So RFID is a complementary technology to your existing barcode label, that same information that's, as it's going down the line, you're pulling those data points from your manufacturing system, you're encoding them onto the QR label. At the same time, you can encode the chip on the inlay with the same information. And the big thing is that makes it more secure. It's a little harder to counterfeit, but also with things like RFID, I can read many items at the same time versus having to have line of sight is still a limiter in the supply chain as far as barcoding and 2D barcodes.
All right. And a final question in the minute we have left. What does Zebra bring to all of this?
So Zebra is excellent at capturing edge data, right? So we have our core products, which we've been involved with since the inception of our company, with our barcoding, our scanning technology, as well as we are now 3 years running, we're the leader in the Magic Quadrant for indoor locationing. So we have a wide breadth of RFID, Bluetooth, BLE, active technology that we offer. And we offer that technology in all kinds of different configurations, whether it's in a hospital, in a, more of a sealed type of product, on a warehouse floor where it can be more rugged. So we have solutions across many verticals, and we have a breadth of hardware that is enabled to fit into those different environments. So it's a very exciting time to be at Zebra.
All right. John Worthland is the industry principal for manufacturing, transportation, and logistics at Zebra Technologies. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for some great insight.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it.
I'm Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. Let's go back now to the studio for more on the Data Industry Exchange.